Hello, this is Sandeep Bhattacharya. I have been working on the development of the Indian labeled and green bond markets for the last 5 years. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this meeting on the Indian Sustainable Debt Market, a report which we have published recently. And we will follow a discussion on this. So the calendar year 2021, by all means, was a very landmark year in terms of volumes as well as variety. We saw a plethora of new instruments come in, and we saw municipal bonds come in. We are talking of sovereign green bonds now. So for the analysis, without much ado, I will hand it over to my colleague, Carolyn. Carolyn, it's all yours for your presentation.
Just unmuted myself there. Hello, my name is Caroline Harrison. I am the head of research in the market intelligence team at Climate Bonds in London. And I'm just going to flick through a couple of slides based on the research paper that we've recently printed to just kind of give you a bit of context for the discussion that is going to follow. So first of all, I want to contextualise the discussion, in fact, with a slide from our global state of the market paper that we published earlier this year. So when we talk about GSS plus debt, that includes the 5 themes of green, social, sustainability, sustainability-linked bonds, and transition that comprise the thematic debt market. At the end of 2021, Climate Bonds had captured more than 16,000 GSS plus instruments with a cumulative volume of $2.8 trillion US. That figure included 1.1 trillion of US dollars that was captured in 2021 alone. So the last calendar year saw fairly dramatic growth in the GSS plus market. And by the end of the first quarter of 2022, which is not shown on this slide, but the market had exceeded 3 trillion. So the green theme was still the largest source of GSS plus debt. At the end of 21, it was 49% of the total. And SLBs demonstrated the fastest growth, expanding 10 times year on year in 2021. So now moving on to the Indian market, everybody's favourite. In 2021, India experienced a post-COVID rebound, if you like, as the market increased 585% on the prior year, with a total of 7.5 billion US dollar equivalent issued in 2021, taking the cumulative total to 19.5 billion. India is the 19th largest GSS market globally and 6th in the APAC region, following China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Singapore. India is one of only 8 countries in the region to boast issuance under all 3 GSS themes: green, social, and sustainability. And the green theme, as mirroring the global issuance in the thematic debt market, if you like, the green theme remains by far the most popular for Indian issuers. And of the 29 issuers that we reviewed for our research, 26 had issued at least 1 green bond since 2015. However, financial institutions are increasingly exploring social and sustainability options, raising 1.1 billion through such instruments by the end of 2021. 3 non-financial issuers, Adani Electricity, Ultratech Cement, and JSW Steel, ventured into the sustainability-linked bond market, and their deals are discussed in detail in the report. The sustainability-linked bond market format can extend the GSS market to include issuers in the harder-to-abate industries. The private sector is responsible for most of the GSS debt originating from India, with 75% of the cumulative volumes, equivalent to around $14.6 billion. Non-financial corporates comprise the largest issuer type by volume and number of deals. In 2021, financial corporates issued 1.1 billion, while non-financial corporates added 6 billion. Both of those were record amounts for a single calendar year since the market's inception in 2015. So now on to the integrity of the market. Over 85% of the volume originating from India had some form of external review in place, which we view as extremely positive. Climate bond certification is the preferred option by volume, closely followed by the second party opinion. So certified on this chart, in case you can't see, is the dark green, and the SPO is sort of the palest turquoise colour. In 2021, almost 2 billion of GSS debt originating from India obtained a climate bond certification. KPMG is the largest approved verifier for climate bond certification in India, having verified 5.4 billion since 2016. So that's almost a quarter of the market, basically. About 15% of the cumulative volume does not carry an external review. And while this figure has remained below 20% over the past 6 years, there is a lot of scope to reduce that further. So the benefits of an external review are sort of spelled out on this slide. It allows the market to develop with integrity. It guides issuers to appropriate use of proceeds, and it gives investors confidence, if you like, in what they're buying. And actually, on the next slide, you can see that this is really, really well illustrated. So India is the third largest emerging market source of green bonds and the second largest emerging market in terms of the number of certifications, following only China. This is really positive for the development of the market. Most of the debt originating from India is dollar denominated, and international investors get a lot of comfort from investing in markets with which they are perhaps less familiar if the labelling is transparent and the external verification is in place. So this is very important for the continued development of the market, that the integrity is maintained. Finally, I'm just going to touch on the 5 driving themes for 2022 and beyond that we have identified. So as Sandeep has already mentioned, and I think this is going to be mentioned a bit more during the following discussion, the Union Budget of 2022 included the announcement of a domestic sovereign bond. This will have huge implications for the Indian GSS market, first and foremost through the exposure that this product will bring. The attention that a sovereign green, social or sustainability bond will bring to the market will be huge, and that will bring massive ramifications in terms of benefits. So sovereign green bonds traditionally help with green market creation, and we would expect that particularly in an emerging market like India. Secondly, most of the deals originating from India have been in the offshore market. So we expect the actions of the Ministry of Finance and the Sustainable Finance Task Force to strengthen the domestic market further in the medium to long term. That, of course, will be helped by the domestic sovereign, because we then expect that thematic strategies and things will receive greater allocations from investors. Thirdly, we expect utility scale renewable energy to continue to dominate among the use of proceeds categories based on robust action mechanisms for assets and support for the banking community. However, there is action from other segments of the market, and this will, of course, be discussed by our panel members. So we see potential for growth from rooftop solar and electric vehicles. We see that as the next best development prospects for the green bond issuance. And again, this is something that will be elaborated on by the panel. And finally, fifth driving theme really will be interest rate movements. So historically, You know, the Indian market has been very sensitive to rate movements, but this would, of course, affect all types of debt. So this is not something that we expect will only impact thematic debt. If it does impact the market, it will impact all debt equally. So we will have to wait and see how expected rate increases will affect GSS Plus issuance, particularly in the offshore market. So finally, I would encourage you to read the report. It's very short, it's very informative, and it looks fantastic. So we discuss the shape and size of the market, spotlight on the themes, opportunities for development, policy tools, and how we can move the market forwards. And, you know, read the paper, share the paper with your friends, tell your friends to show it to their friends. And, you know, let's work together to get the market going. So I'm going to now hand back to Sandeep for the panel discussion, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for that wonderful presentation. Carolyn mentioned about the fact that there's a post-COVID rebound, and post-pandemic, there has been a lot of concern about social issues, and India is the country where, you know, social issues can possibly be addressed through the capital market. So I'll turn to Meherpan and ask him about a very landmark issuance about the skill development bond, which is a part of our analysis. So while there are many other kinds of social bonds which seem to be common, this was quite something. So Meherpan, can you tell us something about this skill development bond?
Sure. Thanks, Sandeep, and thanks everyone for being here today. So I think on the social piece that, you know, the report talks about increasing funding going there, it's always been a very challenging sort of space. I think one of the primary drivers of it is interest from non-profits who want to see a certain outcome achieved, but they also want to see a leverage effect for the money they bring into the space. So they want to put in they want to de-risk other commercial capital and enable it to come into the space. And during the pandemic, the social objectives, that there are 3 impact bonds that we have worked on. One is launched, a couple are in process. The first one was the skill impact bond, which was specifically focusing on livelihood outcomes, and it focused on skilling people along with National Skill Development Corporation. A couple of impact bonds in the pipelines are focused on healthcare outcomes in terms of accrediting hospitals, and the third one is on educational outcomes. And we are in works with certain think tanks and the World Bank in terms of coming up with something for decarbonizing steel, right, and creating zero trucking, zero emission trucking corridors. So there is a lot of financial work being done, and in parallel, there is a mix of for-profit and non-profit money that comes into these instruments. So this was a first of a kind sort of impact bond. We had 16 parties across 8 countries with a mix of non-profit and for-profit money to launch this kind of bond, and it's a first of its kind in the market. It's given the confidence, and we are playing around with, you know, trying to emphasize it, trying to simplify it in the upcoming bonds. There are a lot of learnings and takeaways, but I think it's a very nascent area which is upcoming now. There's a lot of interest there.
Thanks, Meherpan. So we'll dwell on this in detail later, but very briefly, how does the impact investment industry work to, you know, what makes it tick so that, you know, such pioneering deals come to the front?
Sure. So I think the main thing here is, again, right, from the idea is to not sacrifice on profits while at the same time having outcomes that are specific that you can actually achieve. There is a lot of negotiation that happens around what the outcome is, and if we see the returns on these impact bonds, I think from the lower double digits to around 20% is what is financially modeled, and these are all tied to. So this is sufficient incentive for actually for-profit players to get into this space, while also giving the comfort for charities and others to get into the space because they feel that the payments are tied to outcomes. So, you know, your outcomes are getting achieved and not sacrificed for financial returns. So it seems like the best of both worlds.
Thank you. That was quite some enlightenment. Now, from a segment which is relatively developing to what is clearly the mainstream, and I will turn to our panelist, Dhruva Purkayastha, who's an acknowledged expert in renewable energy, and of course, there are many other segments as well. The mainstream is still utility scale renewable energy, and 90% use of proceeds are from there. For the benefit of the audience, which is maybe partly global, I would request you to explain, what makes this industry trick, this utility scale renewable energy, and of course, what are some of the challenges? Over to you. Mute. I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thanks, Nishit Desai and Associates, for calling me into this session. And it's very interesting, Sandeep, that you start with utility scale only and limited to utility scale, which is interesting. It's a very direct relevance when we are talking about scale, renewable solar. What makes it tick is basically the bankability of renewable energy so far. And I'm not too sure what happens going ahead on competitiveness. But the fact that solar has been able to recycle capital from the banking sector into the capital markets, that's a great recycling which is happening. What makes it tick is possibly issuances in dollar denominated terms. Some of it, ideally, masala bonds have happened, which would be good to see where the institutional investor is also able to actually denominate in dollars, but take the risk of variation of exchange risk. But at the same time, I'll finally end by saying that I think we need more circulation of capital for domestic intermediation, because at the end of the day, competitiveness of solar, or most of renewable for that matter, is essentially dependent on the price of money. And that becomes a little tricky when you don't have mechanisms, institutional mechanisms, or even the currency markets don't allow you to hedge the risks pertaining to price. So of course here there are gaps in the BCD market, but I guess we would need a shift to domestic intermediation, domestic green bonds being issued, and ideally I would like to see aggregation for non-utility level solar too. So that's what would make the market of, I think, capital markets into sustainable green renewable energy complete. Thanks.
Yeah, there is also a trend of corporates trying to source their energy through renewable energy options. What's driving that trend? That is a possible segment. We have had queries, but we haven't had issuances yet. What's driving the trend of corporates trying to, have captive power plants or PPAs, which?
Okay, so there are two things. Right? I think, Sandeep, there are two things which are driving this trend, but we should have seen some more such trends. But given the policy and the regulatory situation in rooftop solar, that has sort of stagnated. India has not seen growth in distributed renewable energy, which had a 40 gigawatt target even as a policy target, and we are nowhere close to it. So what has happened is, while they had seen, say, 5 to 3 years ago, there has been significant uptake. What is driving corporate procurement? I think primarily economics. Primarily economics, because renewable energy end-to-end LCOE is cheaper than what the grid electricity is on industrial and commercial, and that differential actually made it till the point, I guess, some regulatory or discount down on it, and we don't have a very positive view going ahead. I hope that is resolved, but that is where it's standing. I think the other fact is, from the financial sector, our disclosure requirements of scope 1, 2, 3, possibly scope 1 and 2 at least, emissions from a disclosure and the pressure from the investing fraternity, particularly institutional investors, both equity, foreign institutional investors, is also driving. So thanks.
Thanks. So in this whole spectrum of the renewable energy space, if you are asked to suggest just two policy measures for the whole renewable energy segment, utility scale, distributed, everything, to enable greater flow of capital, what would those two be?
Okay, I'll have to divide it into two parts.
Sure.
Capital can come from outside, capital can be intermediated domestically. And in my view, when the revenues are in local currency, domestic intermediation is better, and India's depth of domestic intermediation and capital markets are both fairly deep and wide. And so I think a domestic intermediation for India is better. One. So therefore, back to square one, we need to define what is green finance. We need taxonomy. We need regulation directing towards green finance. So it's all definition, taxonomy, green finance, that part of it. And for international capital flows, I think we need greening of development finance in India. So by that, I mean designate green financial institution. Maybe you gave me two. So the first one is define green, come up with the Sustainable Finance Working Group recommendations, look at the regulation adoption of that. So that is one basket. And the second basket is try and use public financial institutions to raise international green finance, which makes the cost of finance lower and disintermediate that downstream through the BFSI system. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sure everybody has enjoyed Zuba's answers. So the mainstay till now of the sustainable finance market is the renewable energy. But we are seeing signs of diversification, and I have got calls from other segments as well interested in raising money. So we are looking at a sectoral view. We now look at the EV ecosystem, and I'll turn to Rakesh, who has done a lot of work in this for my questions. So the first question is, literally the burning question, and I think no discussion which regards EVs can avoid that question, is how will, what is your view on this, the flames and the tragedy that's causing? What's the issue there?
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. Yes, you're very right. Burning of EVs is really a burning question, in fact. And yes, so there are issues which people are trying to study further. Niti Aayog itself is conducting one study. Niti Aayog is a government think tank in India. So they are also undertaking studies. Different institutions, research institutions in India, they are undertaking a study. So, but yes, there are a couple of aspects that one can highlight. As you know, there has been a sudden increase in the demand of EVs in India, especially if you talk of this two-wheeler segment, and now this even four-wheelers are catching up. Car is also catching up. This kind of huge surge in the demand, what has happened that there has been, I will not say a substandard quality, but yes, there has been some first measure that has been taken by battery OEM. And this has led to maybe cell selection, design issues, cell quality itself, battery design management, and also with this, because you're trying to put everything under EV. So within a very limited space, you want you want to best utilize the space given to you. So in terms of energy density, you are trying to maybe compromise on this. So there are lots of aspects which are causing this kind of burning issues. Things will be clearer, but yes, cell quality is one key aspect. Battery management system, temperature management system. These are some of the aspects that we need to take into consideration.
Thank you. So one of the industry trend has been that while of late the traditional OEMs seem to be catching up. Earlier it used to be the startups seem to be dominating the place. Any particular observation of yours?
No, I mean, the market is huge. If you see this is a huge market of around different studies throw different numbers, but if you say 150 billion by USD by 2030 is the number that we are talking of from this segment. So it's a huge number. And now serious players are also getting into this. And moreover, now when the segment is changing, you must have noticed that startups, they were more into this two-wheeler segment. And now that segment change will happen. In fact, the demand pull from different segments, especially four-wheeler, will come now. And this is one of the reasons. First, the size of the market, and second, transformation of the market has led to the interest of traditional manufacturers getting into this.
I see. Thank you. And if you're asked to make just one policy decision, just one, to enable greater access to finance for this EV ecosystem, which is the entire battery and manufacturing, even the financing, what would that be?
Look, this sector is still evolving, and it's quite a promising sector, in fact. But yes, this is also grappling with lots of issues. One of the issues that, especially financiers, that they are grappling with is resale value of the vehicles, in fact. And because of this, if, in my opinion, if government could come up with any mechanism which is risk-sharing mechanism promoted by the government or the DFIs, that will be a good policy push that will have a very huge impact on the financing. Because what you are trying to do through this risk mitigating kind of measures, you are trying to ensure that their loss is covered. So I think this is one direction wherein one can move, and a policy push in this direction will certainly better the financial position.
So risk sharing mechanism for financial institutions is what you're recommending.
Correct, correct.
Thank you. So that was about what it takes for the EV ecosystem to have a lot more financial mobility there. So now the renewable energy and EV ecosystem are high impact investments, and a lot of stuff is happening there. It's very, very high impact. We now come to a more traditional sector, which is agriculture, which has this year seen 2 small size bonds. Again, you can say that that's from the impact investment industry, but there are 2 small size bonds which have been mentioned in the report. You can read them. But I'll turn to the sectoral expert, to the Sanjay, for a little bit of discussion which is not within the report. So for the benefit of the audience, which is logged in maybe from outside India, can you quickly explain the role and function of NABARD? It's a very studied institution, I believe. Sanjay?
Thank you very much, Sandeep.
And
good evening. NABARD, as we understand, is National Bank for Agricultural and Rural Development, and founded sometime in July 1982 under the Act of Parliament. This has been bestowed with very special powers and responsibilities. In a capsule, I'd just like to summarize, if one is to summarize the basic 4 responsibilities of NABARD, we'll start with the regulatory functions. This is one institution other than the Reserve Bank of India, which has been bestowed with regulatory functions under the Banking Regulation Act, Section 35, where we are deeply involved with the institutional development vis-a-vis the cooperative sector and the regional rural banks. So any rural banking initiative, the entire rural banking landscape, NABARD is the regulator for it. One of the next is one very important role of NABARD that we have at a pan-India level is the policy advocacy and the credit role. we will just go for a little bit of number crunching. NABARD is involved in preparing the district credit plans for all the districts of the country, which later get dovetailed into the state plans and which later gets assimilated into the national credit target. So like if we take last year's the ground level credit flow as declared by the government of India was 15 lakh crore. That's basically roughly 194 billion US dollars. So against that, the country level achievement was about 200 plus billion dollars, and NABARD's refinance played almost 12% of the entire 13% of the entire 200 billion US dollars institutional credit flow to the farm sector, which happened last year, was primarily driven by refinance of NABARD. So we are looking at a figure like something in the region of 27, 28 billion US dollars. That's what NABARD refinance scale is. Of course, other than these regulatory and credit advocacies which NABARD has, there's a very significant institution development role which NABARD plays. Like we are proud to say that globally we have run the largest microfinance program, comprising of self-help groups, the joint liability groups, and together these two, that's globally it's the largest microfinance program which was driven primarily by NABARD's interventions. Another very important role which we in the present day context is in the climate domain. I'll be sharing with the panelists and the participants here that NABARD is the national implementing entity for the proposals, climate scoping proposals, which are generated from the country level under the Adaptation Fund Board, and also the direct access entity for scoping proposals under the Green Climate Fund. So like we are the national entity for both these proposals, especially in the domain of agriculture and allied sectors. Other than that, of course, there are quite a few roles. Like we have been traditionally involved in a lot of developmental and livelihood-based initiatives. We do implement a lot of climate resilient projects all over the country in the energy sector, in the agricultural sector, in the water sector, through our grassroots agencies. So, I mean, these are the multifarious roles.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. So now there has been some talk that the answer to a lot of the climate resilience and agricultural issues is technology. I'm not trying to go into the controversies regarding it, but then the fact that over the last 5 or 6 years there has been a number of agtechs which have been able to manifest some amount of agricultural resilience. Using smartphone linkages and also sometimes using very innovative low-cost products. So your views on agtech, both the ones which are more market linkage oriented and the ones which are a bit product oriented.
When we talk of agtech, it's basically the marriage between the technology sector and the agricultural sector. And I would just like to bring forth what is the potential and how we are going about it, and whether the agtech revolution that is happening presently, we're seeing presently, whether it's really able to touch the farmers in the way we possibly need to. So, if we look at some of the reports that have recently been there in the agtech sector, I mean, most of us out here, we are already aware of the tremendous potential which this sector has. There's a document by Bain & Company last year. They came out with a projection that by 2025, India would be having an investment of roughly about 25 to 30 billion dollars in the agri-tech sector. There's another very recent report by Pricewaterhouse, which also indicates the significance of the agri-tech sector, and more than 700 agri-techs have come up. And the exponential growth is observed in this sector. I mean, we have very strong agri-techs like, Dehat is there, AgroStar, Way to Cool, Ninja Card. These are some of the very reputed agri-techs which have touched both the B2B and the B2C platforms. Now, the thing that we need to understand is whether these agri-techs are reaching the farmers in a big way. If we look at the stats, if we look at the household survey assessment by the government of India and very other economic survey data, you would see that the average income of a farming household roughly ranges between, from farming activities, that is, ranges between 2,500 to 6,500 rupees per acre per month. So of course, then there are wages, then there are animal income. I'm not talking of that. So exclusive farm income is between this band. So whether the agri-tech sector has really been able to reach out to the farmers, like recently our Honorable Prime Minister has been mentioning the usage of drones in a big way. There are a lot of agri-techs, just to live cases are there, which have come up over the last few years, which are heavily into drone-based surveys, drone-based spraying of insecticides, pesticides. But the problem is many of these companies have also gone kaput over the last couple of years, primarily because, like, if we only take the case of drone, the input cost is very heavy. Our Indian farmers can't really afford it, this kind of, technology initiatives. So what we need to understand is, while the boom in the agri-tech sector is very welcome, and we definitely need it, given the kind of small holdings that we have, given the kind of dependence that we have in the agricultural sector, more than 60% of the population contributing about 20% to the overall GDP. So the dependence is there on the agri sector, but we need to understand that what farmers desperately need is agri-tech sector basically, to focus on water saving, water lifting, fertigation. So these are the areas that are possibly needed. I mean, technologies like drones, technologies like most of these startups that I had just mentioned, they have a couple of them like AgroStar and all, they have weather advisories, but they are very expensive and cover very few farmers as compared to the overall scenario. So, I mean, there is potential, but then there needs to be a direction in that potential right now, which is not there.
Okay. Clearly, there is potential, but there is also some bubbles and there is also some misdirection. Thank you.
Yeah.
So now, just a very similar question, which I'm asking nearly everyone, every sectoral expert. If you are asked to make one policy decision, and just one, to enable a greater access to finance to climate smart agriculture, what would that be?
In continuation of what one of our earlier panelists have just mentioned, actually, when it comes to climate smart agriculture, climate smart, I'll basically would want to more focus on a sector that is a major contributor to our GDP, that is the MSME sector. That's very crowded. That contributes more than 35% almost to the gross value added, and that has more than 6.33 crores as per the latest ministry data. So it's more than 6.33 crore of units and very little finance, if we see. The credit guarantee schemes which are in place right now have not been effectively been able to ensure credit dispensation. If we look at the SIDBI figures, we would understand that. So maybe as a policy initiative, as a one policy initiative which could majorly impact finance is, group collateral for the MSMEs. On the lines of SHGs, we see, if we look at the SHG landscape, we see how the group collateral has given, it went into 100x and for 80x and 100x and 120x of credit dispensation pre and post. So maybe we could get something. I mean, I'm not talking of 100x, but definitely it can increase manifold if we go for a group kind of lending for MSMEs also.
Good. Okay. Thanks. So basically, you're saying transfer of technology from one segment to the other. Something has worked. Or can that be replicated for SMEs? So that's likely to bring in more capital.
Yeah.
And with or without that, we will see more capital flowing into Agritech, which hopefully gets the right direction, as you pointed out. Thank you. I will now move into.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the insightful conversation, Sanjay. I will now move into something which is very active, and I think a little bit more active in India than in many other places, which we have touched upon earlier, about impact investments in general. So, Mayappan, a little bit more detail. We just mentioned a bond and what's there. So, where does impact investment fit in between, say, pure philanthropy on one end and commercial finance, with finance profit being the only motive?
Thanks, Sandeep. So I think impact investment has been around for a few years now, and as I was saying earlier, we've had there is movement from both ends of the market on a spectrum of pure profit to pure sort of grant-based sort of financing. We are seeing there is different reasons why all sorts of funders want to find a middle path where it's both outcome focused and return focused. From the for-profit side, what I'm seeing is that there is more incentives either because of European regulations or otherwise there is actually additional conditions being put either by DFIs when they are LPs in funds, saying that there has to be a framework, more responsible framework for deploying investments. So they're coming more, away from financing. I mean, profits alone is not enough. We want something more kind of a view. On the non-profit side, I think there has been a pressure to make the funding has been going down. They want to make more of an impact for a more efficient way of sort of spending it. And the idea is to recoup some portion of the capital to continue investing in certain kinds of projects over and over again. So a couple of examples, I think, from what other speakers have been listening to some of the work we've been trying to do in this space and blended finance as a risk mitigating tool. Like, for example, MSMEs was mentioned. We have worked during the pandemic where we've tried to work with non-profits to come in and work with banks, like a CSR to work with a bank to say, we will underwrite a portion of the loss. You go ahead and give the loans to MSMEs, right? So if they take the risk, then there is more capital that comes into the system. Even with respect to EV risk mitigation, I believe that there are non-profits who are focused on the renewable space and environment in general, who may be willing to play that sort of de-risking role. And on green taxonomy as well, in impact investment, I think UNDP's, the NIPFP and the Department of Economic Affairs and Finance Ministry, I know for a fact have been working on the policy side, trying to figure out these definitions and come out with a regulatory regime that's suitable for this. So in terms of impact investment, I think there are different, across the spectrum, there is movement, there is towards the center, which is again trying to find a balance between impact and returns.
Thank you. So, while it's coming out with very remarkable transactions, it's surely not without its shares of challenges. What would be the top 3 challenges you would list out?
So I think the main challenge is, of course, I think for lack of an enabling regulatory system, right? I think even the taxonomy, green finance, I think usually the law either lags behind the market or it can be a market enabler and a market creator. And unfortunately, across the spectrum, in many ways, I think the different ministries are lagging in this function. Like if we have Department of Economic Affairs who's interested in it, we don't have the other ministry supporting it. If we have SEBI supporting Social Stock Exchange, we don't have the support of other ministries. So that having a coherent, I think, regulatory regime, tax sort of benefits encouraging this sort of ecosystem is still not there. The second thing is many of these innovative instruments fall into trouble because it's a steep learning curve for people where it's complex commercials. They're trying for the first time. It's learning for everyone. So, and if anything goes wrong, if there is a regulatory problem, that kills the market straight away. There is not a safe space for them to kind of say there is a regulatory sandbox and, the government is encouraging innovation in that sort of a safe space. That simply is lacking today. And lastly, I think, I think tapping actual amount of funds that's genuinely interested in the space is also tough, right? Because you have a certain set of the pipeline is not there on the investment side, and the the funders are looking for certain kinds of projects, which I think the market is also not able to match the funders and the people on the ground. So I feel these are the problems that we are facing today.
Thanks. But in spite of these problems, there are segments of the impact investment industry which is blooming. Some climate-related companies. One of our certified, we have certified a waste recycling company. I can't name it because it's in the last stage of closure. Clearly was groomed by the impact investment industry. It's a very famous name. So, which segments do you see the impact investment industry grooming climate?
So I think the major ones we have already touched upon, actually, to be honest. I think the main ones we see movement in, at least in terms of our experiences, renewables, e-mobility, resource efficiency, and energy services. I would say these are the main buckets where we have seen movement within this space.
From there, I'll turn into another industry which has very large volume of investments, which is the real estate part. So I'll turn to Anurag for my questions. India has a large amount of green real estate space. What's driving it, and where is the finance coming from? for these states?
Thank you, Sandeep. I think, as you mentioned, that the Indian real estate sector is quite large. And if you look at the green as a segment, then considering various rating systems or agencies which are available, only by Indian Green Building Council, it's almost like 7.17 billion square feet as a registered real estate footprint available at this point of time. And then when we look at different other mechanisms, which are basically the driving force for all the real estate, maybe green real estate development, then I'll take 4 points. The first, maybe the government initiatives. There's a lot of push from the central government, like Bureau of Energy Efficiency and state governments, in terms of making these buildings energy efficient or green, and that is where we see the role of energy consumption building code, Econivas, Nita, and different other frameworks which are taking a lot of shape at this point of time. Second point, which is basically the market-based mechanism, and that is where we see the role of these rating systems, Griha, IGBC, USGBC, EDGE rating systems, all these rating systems playing a very, very important role. And then again, there is a compensatory or maybe assistive support which is available from the government agencies in terms of available some making available some incentives in the form of either the rebate or in the form of floor area ratio, which basically allows developer or builder in terms of making some percentage of the FAR or the built-up area as an additional green FAR also. It's a huge business sense for them, and that's why we see a lot of developers lobby following the FAR incentive in this segment. The third driver that I can notice is basically the maybe the export-oriented business requirement, and that is where we see the MSMEs, SMEs sector. They actually following a lot of beeline in terms of producing a lot of export-oriented product, utilizing the energy-efficient machine or the factories where they manufacture, because this is also coming from the import companies. And the fourth driver that I look at is the corporate policies. We also have seen how the MNCs have built their policies and how the market is also growing, not only towards the green building or the energy efficiency, but they also have started asking for ESG compliances in the market as well. So that is where we see a lot of the push from the corporate policies, and this is the fourth driver that I look at this point of time in the green real estate segment. Now, when we look at the second question of second part of your question, then in terms of from where the financing comes on. In terms of the real estate, if we look at the primarily the sources, they pretty much like following the conventional source at this point of time. So the financial institutions like banks and NBFCs, they pretty much like the favorite mechanisms through which they source the fund. And sometimes in some of the projects, we also have witnessed and noticed that there is a specific access to some international pension fund or souvenir fund. They also have been the resort for few developers. And certainly one of the small scale, maybe I think the small scale real estate developers, the organized market sourcing is always very important, because in most of the cases, this is an area where a lot of unregulated mechanisms, they also play an important role, and they do not have a very structured balance sheet in terms of sourcing the fund for the green real estate. And some of the cases when we look at the green fund access, then certainly the market has availed such funds very, very less, I would say. In maybe I think in my understanding, in the year 2021, where IFC has provided some fund, almost like I think 250 million USD to HDFC. And again, I think 25% of this 250 million was earmarked for the green real estate development. I'm very much sure that it has not been utilized fully, just because I think there is no such mechanisms which is available. How these companies, or maybe I think the financial institution, will disburse the money, on what mechanisms, how they will recognize that the project which is going to get constructed in 3 to 4 or 5 years, how this project which has been initiated as a green project will get continued and get constructed and will be delivered as a green certified project. I think there are a lot of if and buts in this process, and that is where we see the mechanisms which is missing at this point of time in terms of disbursement and monitoring will play an important role. And so this is basically the financial sourcing. That is my response to the second part of your question, Sandeep.
Yeah, thank you. So while there's a lot of green space, but there's a lot of distance to cover, is what you're telling me, and there's a lot of financing
Yes.
work done. Possibly there is right in the pipeline a green bond coming up from one of the financial institutions, which is backed by real estate, which should hopefully kickstart the market in this segment. There have been some issuances, but they have not been, up to the potential. So now, again, a very similar question. One policy decision, just one, to enable greater access to finance for green buildings. What would that be?
So I think if I look at from the developer's perspective, then the priority sector lending, that may be the government policy area, which I think because of the specific mechanisms missingness, we see that this is something which has not been done so far. The second, if we look at from the customer's perspective, then the financial incentives like interest rate rebate, property tax rebates, they will be the fall gain factor for the customers or consumers to follow this.
Thank you very much. It was, I think, I'm sure everybody found it very informative. Thank you, Anurag, so much. From there, we come to something which is again, maybe burning, but not burning all the while, is that of waste management. We recently had pictures and videos of the waste dumps in Delhi, literally aflame, and flames meters high going around. And the issue is that we are a population density, our population density is very high. If we keep on having dump yards like this and flames, then soon our country will become very difficult to live in. So circular economy and waste management becomes a very important thrust area for us nationally, even without anything else. Now, we'll stick to waste management, where, as I mentioned earlier, we have a certified issuance, which is in the last leg of closure. So I will turn to Mr. Shailendra Singh, who's a well-recognized expert in this segment. So it's seeing a lot of action from startup. The green waste management industry is seeing a lot of action from startups. What do you think, sir, will this happen?
Yeah, first of all, good evening to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, as the case may be. Happy to be here and happy to learn that you're on the verge of closing the first issuance in waste management. So that's really nice. On a very lighter note, the gods sent in thunderstorms and rains to quell the fires. I don't mean to make a joke, but that's what happened today. But to your question, waste management is an emerging sector, and the journey, I believe, in India has just started. However, it holds the potential for becoming a huge industry. And a recent report from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs relating to the circular economy potential of waste has pegged this at approximately 30,000 crores, with tremendous potential to create employment as well. And that's a subject that is particularly close to India, where how are we creating jobs as we transition into this circular economy. The field, however, as you all know, is very different from the quote unquote established sectors. Significant play of the informal sector, complex laws and rules, poor implementation of those rules, a municipal system that is essentially broken and needs to be fixed. and so on. And historically, this sector has not been known to give great return on investment. We have some fiascos that have happened earlier to also deal with. Ironically, it's the sheer size and scale of the possibilities which remain largely undervalued and underevaluated is what attracts startups, to find a solution to the problem as it promises returns and an opportunity to build a business model which could have both an economic as well as a social impact. In a way, sometimes I feel that some of the more established players are watching how these venture entrepreneurs perform and enable them to sort of do the initial vetting, perhaps opening the grounds for appropriate entry of large players at the right time. I do believe that there are multiple startups, small ventures, etc. They're finding interesting solutions, but in order to sort of tame this monster, the entrance of large players is inevitable. This may happen through mergers and acquisitions, or possibly even through equity participation from some of the established houses not too far away in the near future.
Okay, so my next question was about, the large versus the small, but I think you have answered a fair bit. Do you want to add something there about, the large versus the small that you mentioned?
Yeah, so there are some, large players. Some of their names are known. Ramki and Viro, for example, they re-christened themselves at Re-Sustainability. Anthony Waste Management, which had a very successful IPO, I think a couple of years ago or a year ago. Then there are smaller waste management companies who are working in the bigger ones are working across the entire spectrum, right? The door-to-door collection, waste disposal, landfill management, so on and so forth. But they are now increasingly focusing on how do we create value from the waste that's being. Then there are the smaller players, but I can also share that some sort of industry houses are also looking at this space in terms of a possible diversification, as long as it adds on or builds on certain core competencies that they are able to bring to the table. This is a capital and a labor intensive area, and rules and regulations are evolving. And though, the much touted PPP model, the public private participation model, has been increasingly practiced, there is still a lot of scope for improvement. So I believe that some of the more established houses will come when the sort of cloud scatters a little bit. But on the good side is that this country has examples of where it has worked well, like the city of Indore, for example. And there are some 2 or 3 other examples. Goa has taken a pretty active step towards addressing this issue. So things are beginning to happen here.
Thank you, sir. With some hope, we now move on to our next section on, the market needs a lot of levers. Yeah. And the good thing is that the Sustainable Finance Task Force, constituted by the Ministry of Finance, is going to provide one such lever for the finance market to invest in these things. Anyway, so I'll now turn to Neha. So please tell us something about the task force set up by the Ministry of Finance for, people who haven't had you are a part of that task force. Tell us about what the task force is all about.
Yes. So thank you, Sandeep, for asking that question. And perhaps it is just right that this question is also addressed at the end of the conversation when we've heard a lot from the experts in the market. And you didn't say that it was a burning question in everybody's mind, but it is very much a burning question. So what is policy and framework looking like? What are policymakers and regulators looking at? And I think it is also supposed to be put in the context of where we are at in terms of the opportunity. And just a very recent report tells you that the global green economy size stands at about $7 trillion USD, which is going to be neck to neck with the fossil fuel industry if you were to just contrast it. And we heard about India, but we also know that it's been an enormous surge in all kind of thematic issuances across the world. Our 2021 report for global financial thematic issuances tells us that they're about, we have already crossed $1.5 trillion of green bonds. And you mentioned, Mayappa, that, social and thematic bonds are there. I have been in this space now for more than 15 or 16 years, where I have had the opportunity to work very closely with policy and regulation. And what we can say is that in 2007, just a little bit of chronology, which helps us tell us that we have moved a long distance and we still have to move a longer distance. So in terms of pace and scale, we do need policy and regulation. That kind of nudge is important for our targets, whether that is 2070 target, and much closer to that is the 2030 target. So to 2007, RBI came out with a circular, and it is 2022 now, where I think from the point of view of where how the policy apparatus moves from awareness to anchoring is perhaps now taking a much more concrete shape. So you mentioned, Mayappa, that for a fact that the Ministry of Finance is doing something. Let me just shine a torch in that direction. So yes, Ministry of Finance has established a sustainable finance task force. It has all the regulators on it, from RBI to PFRDA to SEBI to IRDA, and also IFSCA. It also has 3 ministries. Ministry of Finance is anchoring it, but Ministry of Environment and Forest, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and Niti Aayog are also part of it. And what it has done wonderfully well, of course, UNDP provides a secretariat, and Dhruva is also there as part of that whole, effort that is happening. What it has done very well is, at least started that process, established working groups where it is inviting practitioners and experts. And there are 4 working groups. There is one on taxonomy. We talked about definitions, and we talked about definitions being one of the policy levers. There is another working group on resilience, disclosure, and regulation, which Dhruva is a part of. There's another one on sustainable finance roadmap, which puts together everything in terms of what the sustainable financial architecture could look like. And then there is an ecosystem development working group, which looks at trainings, capacity building, and all those foundational issues that need to be looked at. They have also developed, an action plan, which would probably look at, these 4 pillars. One is of definitions, taxonomy, and I can, if you allow me, just will give you a little bit of a reflection, as much as I can give, without the report being out just yet. The report is going to be released very, very soon. We're all eagerly awaiting, not only stakeholders like us and market participants, but also the regulators who have actually been very actively involved in preparation of that report. What I can say about taxonomy is, as part of that working group, is that it has not only environmental objectives, but it also brings in social. And I think that is something that we are going to contribute in terms of even the policy initiatives that the world has seen. And also, in that sense, it keeps the spectrum of sustainable finance broad enough and does not fragment it. And I think it is extremely important to have that. 3 sectors in the first phase: energy, transport, and agriculture. So what we have heard today will perhaps be very, very, elemental to the discussions going forward. And as soon as it comes out for feedback and consultation, I think the invitation from the ministry, from stakeholders who are part of that, will be to engage in consultation and feedback. That's on taxonomy. Dhruva mentioned there is a slew of recommendations that we have given on the regulation side. So hopefully those will be also taken up in a very structured way of how do you redesign incentive structures. So the idea is very clear that with our own targets and with the I will not call it pressure, I would simply call it the movement across the globe. You can call it that EU is doing much more and EU is somewhere apart. I do not think so, because supply chains, cross jurisdictions, and we will have to respond. We'll have to prepare ourselves robustly to be able to have a good policy roadmap, a good incentive roadmap. And just one more point before I conclude is that it is both sides. It is not only the opportunity side of it, that how would you actually mobilize finance, and what should financial actors be doing, financial sector be doing, but also the risk side of it. So we know that there is reporting right now in terms of BRSR, but how do we actually make those disclosures much more granular, which are able to really help both the borrowers and the lenders in terms of the common expectations, what we are measuring, what we are disclosing, and reduce that asymmetry of information, because all of this finally comes down to reducing the risk perception, not only real risk but also risk perception, having a common language, reducing asymmetry of information. And I think the policy apparatus and the regulatory apparatus is very cognizant of all of these things. On Friday, I attended a CAFRA seminar on transition risks and sustainable finance. We've been talking and working in consultation with the regulators, who are very openly engaging and listening to stakeholders. So where we will be in 1 to 3 years will perhaps be a much more concrete shape of policy and regulation.
Thanks. I think you've answered about the implications as well. So we move on from this discussion to the possible outlook. So we have a very senior banker here, Shamit. Yeah. So maybe we can face the camera or go out. So as we discussed, this has been a very offshore market driven. Now recently there's been some domestic movement as well. So there are some encouraging signs there. How do you see the markets going ahead? Which segments are you bullish on?
Well, firstly, to be in this market is slightly frustrating, because you see the need for change, but you see there are practical impediments to it. To be involved in this, you have to believe in it personally and be a bit of an evangelist. I was lucky enough to be in touch with IFC, to be in touch with Climate Bond Initiative. And possibly that gave me the view that yes, we can wait 5 years, 7 years for things to happen. As Sandeep has said, the overseas market has scale. It has a huge pool of liquidity. It has the ability to go for longer tenors. Unfortunately, it comes with a hedging risk and higher cost. And at times like this, when the external market is extremely volatile because of the exchange movement being all over the place, we have to come back to the domestic market. So the good news is that in all these last 5-6 years, we have made some progress. We've had lending institutions being able to communicate, the overseas lending institutions, to issuers that we would prioritize those projects which have an extra bit of green in it. We would take sacrifices on liquidity or tenors or on risk if you give us that. We've had domestic lenders who have raised equity and other forms of capital, who, to give an edge to their overseas lenders, have committed to lending in green. But if we want to shift from the loan market to the capital market, which is obviously what we want to do, we don't want to be restricted to lenders. Lenders are always willing to lend to project finance or later to operating projects. Capital markets want to lend only to operating projects. Over there, we see that the first step has been achieved, that lenders want bankable projects. Bankable projects are there in renewables, of course, with the better lenders, better policies, more stability. And the only concern is that the capital markets needs liquidity. Loan lenders do not. So to some extent, the capital market has been undercut in the past. But the sheer volumes the amounts we are investing in renewable to reach our climate goals, to reach our energy security goals, the sheer volume of supply creates its own demand. And you would have the smarter borrowers saying that even if it comes at a higher rate, we want to seed the capital market. We want to demonstrate that we are good credits, that there are capital market lenders who will give us money. Even there, we might see in the first couple of deals or the first maybe year of deals that banks will still take stake, but you will have insurance coming in for medium maturities. You will have mutual funds who have already come in for shorter maturities. Pension funds are yet to come in because you may not have so many AAA assets, but they may come after some time, maybe if the project is operational and gets some kind of rating uptick. So I would still say that we have to be patient. We have to look for some more years for things to go much larger. But the kind of place we are in is something I would not have thought we would have reached maybe 3 years back. To answer maybe one of Sandeep's questions, which is asked everybody, what would you wish for to kickstart this market? I would say that this is the advantage of being one of the last speakers, so I'm ready for the question. I would say that there should be some kind of institutional support for green funding. The problem we do face is that we have reached a certain stage in green funding internationally when the need is well understood. The perils of, let's say, greenwashing or maybe improper certification is also well understood. So we know enough to know that should not make haste in going ahead. But somewhat like India went in telecom from 2G to 5G with maybe a brief interlude at 4G, maybe in green funding, we might take more steps to go forward. But when we do, we might skip 1 or 2 generations which have been done with international, and hopefully we will reach faster. So without giving tax incentives, how do we get bond money into green funds is a question, because it's maybe I'm right on this. I'm not an equity person, but maybe it's well understood that equity returns are better with green kind of credits because they are more sustainable. Are debt returns better with green kind of credits in the mainstream, outside the renewable, outside some other kind of places? We do not know. We have to figure that out.
Thank you, Shamik. We also have 2 members of the verification community here who are also always, pursuing transactions. So the same question first to Aditi and then to Anirban. Which segments are you getting the most queries on? Aditi first.
Sure. So I think some of the themes you all have been discussing, main ones, which is renewables, green buildings, NBFCs and banks, mostly on the social side as well. There's a lot of priority sector lending and lending by microfinance institutions. So I think that's a trend that we're seeing more and more prevalence of. But also, I think hard to abate sectors, especially exploring linked instruments. So segments like steel and cement are inquiring about, how they can go about borrowing in this market or raising money via sustainability linked bonds. So that's another one we are seeing. Automotive would be another one, I would say, that we're getting some queries from. And then another theme would be telcos, data centers. I think India has quite a few of those. So those would be the main steps.
Anirban.
Thank you. I would say we are seeing the ecosystem is evolving over last at least 3 years, I would say. But from a transactional point of view, more corporates are seeing it as a long-term solution for their debt restructuring. Many of the corporates are saying that whatever their corporate bonds are, in some point of time, they want to level it. It's not that one of a transaction they want to do it. And the sectoral experts, whatever they have talked about, we have seen that there is a need that in earlier climate reduction projects or CDM days, what we used to call as many of you are aware of program of activities, which used to actually mainstream many of the large scale projects into the beneficiaries. And I think there is some element of that policy development is required when it comes to climate finance as well. that how we can take a kind of a program of activity for scale it up, any direction you want to take. And of course, Aditi mentioned about the sustainability linked instruments. Yes, corporates are seeing it as a kind of also image makeover. What next for ESG? What next for sustainability? Let us come out with SLB. So that is a movement is going on, and for that, a very important need is that it is corporates are not looking at it as a one-time transaction. Rather, they let them have a very strong sustainable finance framework for their, like they have their own quality or ESG manual. Let them also have their sustainable finance framework with support from the banks, policymakers, standard setting bodies like CBIs, and to some extent assurance partner to see that how they can make a long-term kind of document. I want to just add another area is that to some extent, while the sustainable finance task force has been formed and there is a work started in the right direction in India, contextualization is needed, and at one point of time we can see how we can get the retail investors move towards choosing a green instruments rather than a traditional instrument. That is one area I think we will see in another couple of years. One fine day, maybe the Zerodha will come out with a green ETF. Already there are some small tranches are there, but then when the retail investors will probably come into the picture, I think the entire ecosystem will get stable. There will be a good flow of money, and then popularity of the instruments will also. And another good interest what we are seeing is from the corporates, basically on the corporates who are coming out with green products or to some extent low carbon products. So to develop that, either they have to offset, they have to come out with a lot of technology or energy transition per se in their operation. So that is going to really drive in India, like we have started seeing in metals. We will see soon in FMCG and other space also. Green products will certainly be an important area.
Thank you, Anirban. We are just 20 minutes over our. And I'm sorry, we have overshot the time limit of an hour, which was supposed to be. But I'm sure the audience have been at least enlightened by some of the members, if not all. Thank you for being with us. And please read the report, as Caroline has been saying. Thank you.